Hello, this is the looper algorithm on the disting EX. The looper algorithm offers you 4 simultaneous and independent stompbox style loopers in one algorithm. By stompbox style looping, I mean the kind of thing you get on a pedal where you have one button to start recording, stop recording, pause, overdub, stop, clear, all on a couple of foot switches. In our case, by default at least, on these buttons, though of course being the disting EX you can map these to CV or MIDI or I2C or anything you like. But for the purposes of the demo, we'll just proceed with the buttons. I've got a signal for looping coming from this disting Mark IV through the Praga, just so I've got a convenient way to mute it. And then straight out stereo to the speakers, and another thing which I'll plug in a minute. But that's basically what we've got. So the fundamental principle is you've got 4 loopers and any one or combination can simultaneously be active for doing stuff. And this is indicated in the display with that kind of reverse video bit. So if I change the target there, you can see I'm targeting loop 1, loop 2, loop 3, loop 4. But then things get slightly interesting when you can select multiple loops at the same time, or all of them at the same time if you wish, but just to avoid confusion for now, we'll just dive in with loop 1. Loops can be mono or stereo. I'll use mono in this case, and you can use 8, 16 or 32-bit recording mode with corresponding increase or decrease of loop time. 16-bit mono is the default, which gives you about 20 seconds per loop, which is reasonable. So let's get some audio going.
And one we intend to win.
To get a loop going, we'll press record when we want to record.
Go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Press stop.
And do the other things, not because they are easy.
The original. So now we've got a loop.
And do the other things, not because they are
So you can
easy,
see the loop time shows progression across the top.
do the other things, not because
Now we've got a
they are
loop, we
easy,
can
but because
stop the loop
they are hard.
and start the loop.
And do the other things.
Like so. You might want to overdub, so let's get the audio back again. Overdub, press record again.
Will serve to organize and measure the best, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Serve to organize and measure, not because
So there you
they
go,
are
we've
easy,
overdubbed.
but because they are hard. Serve to organize and measure, not because.
And stop. And once we've stopped, we can erase the loop, which you do by holding down what was the record button. And now you're back to where you started. That's the essentials of what you can do with this, though of course it goes a lot further. So I'll just get another loop going.
One we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too. And one we intend to win. And
Okay,
the others too.
so
And one we intend to win, and the others too.
obviously we've got 4 inputs, 4 outputs. The loops can take their inputs from an input you choose. They can use the outputs you choose. So individual outputs for individual 4 loopers or stereo mixes, which you can set up in here. So input controls, output controls, it's set to use those at the moment. And then if it's a stereo one, you can pan it.
And the others too.
So
And
left,
one we intend to win.
right,
And the others too. And one we intend to win. And the
and
others
gain.
too. And one we intend to win. And the others
So
too.
you can set up a mix
And one
of the
we
4
intend to
loopers
win.
and output them
others
through
too.
stereo as you
And
like.
one we intend to win. And the others too.
Crossfades.
And one we intend
Each
to win.
loop has an adjustable crossfade amount. At the moment there's basically no crossfade, it's very, very short just to avoid clicks. But you can wind that up
And one we intend to win. And the others too.
quite a lot.
And one we intend to win. And one we intend to win. And one we intend to win. And one we
So this is great for nice seamless ambient looping. You can have a big long loop with a big long crossfade, so it all just whooshes around nicely.
One we intend to win. And the others too. And one
Put
we
that down
intend to win.
low for now.
The others too. And one we intend to win. And the others
VCAs. Each looper has a VCA input. So you can use one of the inputs
one we intend to
and
win.
put an LFO or an envelope in it or whatever
One we intend to win. And the
to
others too.
affect its level. At the moment that's not active. If I select that on, say, input 6 and then put this little LFO into input 6,
To win. And one we intend to win. And the
I'll
others
make
too.
that a bit faster.
And one we intend to win. the others 2. And 1 we intend
So that
to
gives
win.
you a way of controlling your
And 1 we intend to win. And
loop
the others
mix
2.
from CV control
To win.
very smoothly.
The others 2. And 1 we intend to win. And the others
Turn that off again for now.
we intend to win. And the others 2. And 1 we intend to win.
Monitor outputs. So there's a little separate mix for routing the input signal to the outputs while you're listening to it before you've looped it. At the moment, that's just set to listening to input 1 through the stereo outputs. That's configurable as well. Pan and gain. And then we come to envelopes. So at the moment, when I start and stop it, it stops, it starts. Again, great for kind of punchy rhythmic looping, but for nice ambient looping or smooth transitions, you can set an attack and decay envelope on that. So if I wrap up the attack and then the decay as well, and then start the loop, it fades up. And it fades down super slowly in that case. So that's nice to have things coming in smoothly. Let's put that down for a minute. There's a separate envelope that affects the overdubbing. So when you hit record to start overdubbing, it will fade that in with an envelope so you don't have something punching in suddenly if that's not what you want. So again, let's put a time on that and a decay. And then if we set our loop running and set some original material going, start overdubbing.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do
Stop overdubbing. Flashing icon indicates it's fading out.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do.
So there's our overdub. It faded the overdub in and it faded it back out again at the end.
We choose to go to the moon and
Overdub fade. Right, let's stop that so I can hear myself think. By default, when it's overdubbing, it's just layering stuff up with no decrease in volume of the previous material. If you turn overdub fade on, let's put that down to say 3 dB, then every time it goes around the loop as it overdubs, the original will get quieter. So if I start it playing, activate overdub.
we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do. We choose.
So you can hear it's fading out. So this is your classic kind of sound on sound looping where you might set up a big loop, keep playing into it, replacing the old material with new.
Organize and measure the. Organize and measure the. Organize and measure the. Organize and measure the. And the others too. And the others too. And the others too.
And so on. And when you stop overdubbing, you go back to it not fading out and it being locked. Right, pause mute. Let me just, my loop's faded out so much I can't really hear it properly, so we'll record a new one.
And 1 we intend to win, and the others too, and the others too, and the others too.
Okay, so by default when you stop the loop, it pauses it. You can see the play position indicator there. If I go
the others too, and the others too.
Like so. An alternative is to mute instead. So the loop is continuing to play, but
and the others and the others too.
But you mute it instead of pause it. And then the third option is retrigger, which basically every time you play the loop, it'll start it from the beginning again.
And the others too. And the others too.
So,
and the others too. And the others too.
Okay.
And the others too. And the others.
Trigger outputs are next. So you can have a loop trigger output for each loop. Trigger output, I mean a short pulse that fires whenever the loop goes round. You could use this to trigger envelopes, or you could use it to trigger tempo synced delays or effects or things like that. You can use any of the outputs to output a trigger, and this algorithm also lets you use an attached ES5 module to output your triggers as well, so you don't lose your actual audio outputs. I don't have an ES5 attached here, so I'll just use one of these. So if I set the trigger output to be 4 in this case, then every time the loop goes, output 4 will fire.
And the others too. And the others too. And the others too. And the others
Possibly
too.
can't see that on the video, but believe me, that's firing red every time it goes round the loop. So that's potentially useful. Trigger outputs. You can also reverse the loop. So this isn't mapped to a button by default, but you could map it to a CV input or a MIDI input or what have you. But for now, we'll use the parameter to do it. So if I set the loop and reverse,
and the others too, and the there we go. The others too, and the others too.
And you can overdub while you're looping, while you're going backwards. In which case you end up with one backwards and one forwards.
Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. We're willing to accept. We're willing to accept. We're willing to accept.
So that's good fun, reversing stuff. And now we're on to the bit depth and stereo controls, which I've already mentioned. Low pass filter. There's a low pass filter applied to the all the loops optionally. It's off by default. This is provided particularly with the 8-bit mode in mind, because that does tend to be a little bit hissy. If you want to roll off that treble, you can just wind that down to your choice, but as I say, it's off by default. As well as the button control, some special MIDI support is added for this mode as well. I've got my MIDI expander here going into the EX, which is connected to this Fader Fox UC4, which has got a old style MIDI output, which is handy, and I've got these buttons mapped. So these are mapped basically to the white notes on the keyboard if this was a keyboard from C4 up. The first 4 buttons let you select the target loop. If you watch the target loop indicator there, 2, 3, 4. If you hold down multiple buttons like a chord on the keyboard, you can select multiple loops to target at the same time, which is useful. And then the next 3 buttons are mapped to the same as these plus reverse, so that's record, play and reverse. So just to give you a demo there, let's have some audio.
Serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. The best, because that of challenge is one that we're willing to of our energies and skills.
So I've recorded, play,
best of our energy
reverse.
The best of our energies and skills. The best.
And if I want to record another loop, say loop 2.
Of our energies and skills, the best, because of our energies and skills will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies, of our organize and measure the best of our energies.
So I've got 2 loops, 1 and 2. I can stop.
The best
Stop that
of
one.
our energies and skills will serve to organize and measure
that one.
that goal.
Stop that one.
Will serve to organize and measure that.
Stop both. And then if I want to do both at the same time, press both buttons. Play.
Best will serve to organize and measure
like so.
the best.
And this also gives me an opportunity to show the mix inputs a bit more clearly, maybe.
Will serve to organize
And one of them that way.
Will serve to organize and measure that goal. The best. Will serve to organize and measure that goal.
So there you go, that's the MIDI control. It's also possible to give the looper a clock input. Here I've got an output from the FH2 coming into input 6 of the disting, and I've also rigged up a clock pulse generating a bass drum sound into the mixer so you can hear where the beat is. Basically what this does now is it means every time I press record or playback, it's going to wait and synchronize that action to the clock that it's getting. So if I start my FH2, there's the beat going, and there's our clock that we're going to sync our recording to. So I'll get some audio.
Best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we're willing. That challenge, because that challenge, because that challenge.
So I've got a nice 2-second loop there, matching to the 120 BPM that I've got going there.
Because that challenge, because that challenge.
If I stop it and restart it, it'll start it on the beat.
Because that challenge,
Let's record another loop.
because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept. That challenge, one we are willing to challenge. One because that challenge, one because that challenge, one because that
Nice synchronized loop. So that's what you can do with the clock input. I'll stop that. So there, this whole demo, I've used one or maybe two loops out of this thing. You've got 4 to play with. They can all be stereo and they can all be much longer than I've demoed as well. So great potential there for some big loops on the looper algorithm of the disting EX.